You're listening to the Eliott Edge podcast, and we're listening right now to Jason Estrin's Stander. Thanks, Jason. You can hear his other music on SoundCloud. Just look up Jason Estrin, Estrin. I'm just going to listen to this for a moment before we get started. So I'm just waking up right now, and I saw Rodney Asher's movie, his new movie, A Glitch in the Matrix last night, and I really like this director a lot. Room 237 and his second film, The Nightmare, which is another collection of interviews with a subculture of people who suffer from sleep paralysis and night terrors. They do some really great effects work in it, and the story is very, very compelling. The storytelling is very compelling, and so A Glitch in the Matrix is following that same thing that he's doing, which is he kind of finds this fascinating subset of people involved with something kind of bizarre, and goes into a dive. I wish these films were longer. That's the thing, is all three of his films that I've seen that I'm aware of, Room 237, The Nightmare, and A Glitch in the Matrix, is what they have in common is they have a high rewatchability value, which I think is a sign of a pretty good documentary. I do wish these films were longer, though, and kind of almost more of a deep dive. Especially in the latest one, in A Glitch in the Matrix, you just kind of want a little more, even though what he does accomplish in the edits, or what the editor accomplished, is that he does create kind of this a little bit of a narrative thing going on while people are telling their Glitch in the Matrix stories. The movie moves between people who are being interviewed that absolutely are convinced they're in a simulation, and there's this author they bring up. I can't remember if she quite believes, but she brings up which is something I'll talk about later, but how the simulation theory can lead to solipsism. In fact, a lot of the documentary is about that, and how one way out is Eros. Eros is what is just melding consciousness with another person. And even Eric Davis brings up, okay, so who cares if it's a simulation? What does that mean about relationships and love, if you're in one? So that was really fun that they brought that material up, because I think that's really important when going into simulation theory. So it's also got Nick Bostrom is in it, the great Nick Bostrom, who wrote Are You Living in a Simulation, a computer simulation. So it's really good to see him on camera talking about it. I used to write for an outfit associated with Nick Bostrom, the IEET, the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies. I don't know why they have gone the route that they've gone. It used to be just sort of this public publishing forum that they would vet the material, and it was really great. Now it's been reduced to an archive and a Medium microblogging page. You should go take a look at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies on the Wayback Machine, and then look at it now and email these people and ask them what's happened. It's awful. But anyway, so Nick Bostrom, it was cool to see Nick Bostrom on there. He was the head of, I think it was physics and philosophy. I know it was definitely philosophy, I think, but I think he was head of both at Oxford. I could be wrong. Anyway, so they bring up the paper, which you basically have to. But and they bring up guys like Edward Fredkin. Edward Fredkin makes an appearance in the film, which was really great because he he really got the ball rolling in this whole simulation debate. People bring up like Nick Bostrom, but Edward Fredkin extrapolated on, I guess, like John Wheeler, who's like everything is information, and Fredkin's like, okay, so if the universe is computable, where is that big computer? And it's like, oh, it must be in another dimension. It must be an other. It can't possibly be in the same physical universe, because if the physical universe is a simulation, the computer can't exist inside the simulation. Okay. So it touches on some stuff where I'm like, oh, I'm really glad this Here's the thing. All in all, I was really like, oh, I'm really glad this documentary is going here, because I'm really glad. And it's got it's got a gimmick in it where some of the people being interviewed are in these sort of like avatar formats, and that kind of turned me off at first. I was like, oh man, we're going to be looking at avatars, and then after a while you're like, oh man, well, what's being suggested is that we're all avatars. Okay, now I get it. And it kind of ends up working for the film, I think. That is, it ends up working for the film eventually. Like, at first you'll be like, oh no. And then throughout the movie you're like, okay. One of the things I like about this director, Asher, I think that's how you pronounce his name, is that he... all three of these films are really good at immersing you in the minds of the people that he's exploring. So in The Shining, when you've got like all the maps and all the like kind of images and stuff, you sort of realize that like, oh, this director is really good at visually taking you into the minds of these people. Like, at first you think the documentary is just about The Shining, but then when you compare it to these follow-up films, to The Nightmare and A Glitch in the Matrix, is that in The Nightmare, you are very much in the minds of people suffering from night terror and sleep paralysis, and the kind of like non-interview sequences when he's trying to show this stuff visually is totally terrifying, and you feel sucked into their like dark world. The Glitch in the Matrix now does the same thing, where it's like a lot of the animation material you see in it makes you really understand what's it like to be in these people's worlds. And, and that's something I kind of deeply appreciated about the film, because, we have things like Tron, we have things like, Johnny Mnemonic in The Matrix, and more, and Total Recall, and more films have, sequences in them with someone entering another world, or someone entering another body, or someone finding out that the world they live in is one of many, or someone finding out that their world is a computer simulation. That's been depicted ad nauseum in science fiction, visually. But what I really liked about the animation sequences in this is that it had this great way of... The animation has this great way of going kind of like under your neocortex. It goes like... It kind of hits you sort of subliminally over time. Just, okay, if you take this idea, you don't even have to say take this idea seriously. If you just indulge this idea long enough and allow it to warp your perspective just to see what that's like. I thought it was like pretty damn effective. There's one sequence, this is not like really a spoiler, but there's one sequence when one of the guys interviewed who is starting to have weird feelings, he decides to go to a sensory deprivation tank. He goes in and he feels his body dissolve. He's not on drugs as far as we know. He didn't say anything, but he's in the sensory deprivation tank. His body dissolves, and he's like, "Oh, I am the code. I'm just the code." And he was like, "Yeah, I know that from DNA, but now it's like getting clearer and clearer, because like if you just want to talk about DNA, yeah, that's straight up code, and everything is made of code, and it just goes further and further, and it's like, oh, the way atoms behave is like programmed code." So it's like he has this dissolving experience, and then he comes out, and that's depicted really, really well. The dissolving experience is And even like he says things like my head started to vibrate and shake, and it's like, okay, great. So this is pretty good because this is doing something that isn't talked about enough in like simulation circles, is like out of body experience and meditation and stuff. But this film has two examples of it. One person is just listening to hymns in a church, and the whole world looks like a code. And then it's this other guy in a sensory deprivation take, and suddenly his whole world looks like code. And so there's these really excellent examples of like how to like really understand the simulation hypothesis in terms of its like implication for your immediate felt presence of experience. There's some muck-ups too. There's some muck-ups here. Hold on. These are like, I would call them muck-ups only in terms of like not pushing the theory far enough, and everyone who knows me kind of thinks that Tom Campbell is the one who's really the vanguard on simulation theory. And that's this idea of like a bunch of people watching a computer, and our universe is part of the computer. And they say something like, no, we should spread all over the universe. That way the people monitoring the computer notice us and we can say hi to them. I really don't think it works like that at all. I think more like you wouldn't have to spread yourself over the universe. You just have to send like they can read your mind. If you're part of the big computer, if you're basically part of a giant AI, and you know what makes you think that the superstructure can't read what's going on in one of its little file processes it's running? So it's like you wouldn't have to take over the universe, bro. You just have to everyone would have to say hi with their minds, you know, right? Anyway, that's one thought. This is the thing, is that there's some traps in the film and in simulation theory out there. And one of them is the idea that it has to be an ancestor simulation, like Bostrom says. So that means like he's got this little idea where, not little, it's a big ass idea, but the little version of it is he's like, one of these things has got to be true, okay? One, every civilization that becomes somewhat advanced dies out because like it just can't handle technology. It never becomes what's called technologically mature, right? And we're getting close to that with like computers and stuff. Two, every civilization that gets that far decides it doesn't want to run simulations, doesn't want to simulate the weather, doesn't want to simulate what maybe dinosaurs walked like, doesn't want to simulate how like game theory in a computer or something like that. They just don't simulate anything. And the third thing that he says is that like if both of those are not true, then it's almost certain that we're in a simulation and that we're quote unquote simulated people. Now that's where guys like Campbell and I like really split. I mean, guys like Bostrom and Campbell split there, and I'm like more on Campbell's side than Bostrom's side, because it's like, okay, hold on a second. Because it's like, okay, and one of the things that this documentary talks a lot about is the idea of simulated people. In a simulation, it's totally possible to have quote-unquote simulated people. You could basically have anything in a simulation, but as long as it's like, you know, the rules allow it. But I really, Campbell goes more like, don't think of them as simulated people. That's not helpful. Think of it as another representation of consciousness undergoing its like downloading and rendering. So he thinks more like everything is like conscious, and that there's not like NPCs running around. If it's a quote unquote NPC, it would really just be like part. I mean, I don't know. No, I don't think it's. I think like when people have a moment, like maybe they bump into like something like a guardian angel moment, like you're about to walk into traffic and you would have certainly been killed, but someone stops you. That happened to me once, and that felt like, that could have just been the emotion of the moment, but it felt very much like that person felt like they were just dropped in to help us, and that actually is in the film as well. So I don't know. I don't like the idea of simulated people. I think everyone is kind of. But you wouldn't be able to tell, and that's like a big thing in philosophy. The zombie problem. You wouldn't really be able to tell. They wouldn't like. See, in a Philip K. Dick universe, they would break. They would have a breaking point, and you'd be like, "Boo!" You'd be like, "Oh my god, I'm talking to a robot." Like that would happen in fiction. But I feel like if the universe, or if the computer actually generated NPCs, they would be so much like us that you wouldn't really know. It would be impossible to tell. Like they would not break down like Philip K. Dick, like with steam shooting out of its neck and like an eyeball popping out with a spring attached. Like it wouldn't go like that. It would be convincing. That's what I think. Anyway, but yeah, NPCs. I kind of doubt it. It could be out there. Non-playable characters. I mean, they could be out there, but I really doubt it. I think everyone is basically consciousness. I think everyone is. Everyone is a player, and the player is part of a super player, and the super player is this partitioned part of the computer that's just interacting with itself, so it can learn to interact with itself better. That's what I think. There's this adversarial idea in A Glitch in the Matrix where it's like every other unit outside yourself is an adversarial unit. And it's like, is it really, you really need to see it that way? Is that the only way it can be seen? Because I'm more like Campbell's direction and think that no, it's you have to. It's all about like the evolution of the system interacting with itself. So that's like really that's another way to say pro-social. I think like the game, like look the game. If you want to call it the game's got this crazy element where everything is about interacting. It's very much like a giant multiplayer game, right? A giant online multiplayer game. And it's like all of us are living like rather kind of like, um, I guess you could say tedious lives that are filled with like mundane stuff. And, but some of it is, one of my favorite words, transmundane. Like it can be transcendental. It can be extremely beautiful, especially if you know how to tune into beauty. It can also be like tragic, short, violent, and brief. But the one thing that this whole thing has in common, at least among us humans, well, not even among us humans, among ecosystem, is that everything has to do with interaction. It's all interaction based. And like you're always plugged in, except for when you sleep. And then you're kind of like plugged into some like mini game. Dreaming is like the mini game that you get between levels. Where you're like, we're race truck car driving now? Okay. Oh, and there were several, there's tangents I want to go on with this. But let me see what else. But yeah, no, I'm not really one for NPCs. I can understand the system intervening through a character, but I don't think there's like a lot of NPCs. Maybe there are. I don't know. I think most of it is like we're all players and we're all like the whole name of the game is interacting with each other, so we all become like more pro-social and more organized, like, and more like compassionate and effective. Like to me, that's like obviously what the name of the game is. I don't think it's like self-destruction the game. Like everyone who's got kind of a thought about how to have a more beautiful future, it's always been kind of like a like a utopian society that's got itself together and everyone is like basically pretty nice to each other. Like ta-da. Yeah, that's what I think the game is trying to do with all this player interaction, because you got to ask why all this player interaction. And it's either like trying to collect random data on choice making for these like little individuated units of consciousness, as Tom calls them. It's all about choice making, like one way or another. So there's another part in the film about nihilism and solipsism, and how the simulation theory can lead you to that, especially if you start believing everyone else is around you as a non-playable character. One of the things I kind of, because Campbell talks about this stuff too in terms of like, yeah, if it might be a video game illusion, but like, look, there are consequences. And that gave me this idea of real enough. I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with the idea of real enough. It's like, I'm sure I'm not by far, especially when you consider, like, I don't know, the history of all the writings in Asia. But the idea that the universe isn't real, or reality is kind of like a phantom, or I love it when they call it Maya. It's like a magic trick. But there are consequences. I was thinking last night while I was in the shower, it's like, yeah, if the water's too hot, you can have the illusion of burning your ass. But also, like, get your arm chopped off. Your arm gets chopped off, you lose that data stream, basically, right? I mean, you lose that information stream that's gone from your character, that's gone from your game. So I came up with the idea of real enough, and it's in a couple of my stuffs, but it's like, okay, so does that mean nothing matters? If the universe is a simulation, does that mean nothing matters? And Campbell goes au contraire. It means everything matters. This is a game you're playing to see like how, like what you can overcome, like how you grow, really, like how you grow. That would be it. That would be how you grow. Yeah. So to me, it's like, oh, it's real enough then, right? There's another part in the film which I won't go into, which really explores the idea of consequences if you think this is a video game and you go on a rampage. But there's a couple of examples of that. But yeah, so that's not explored so much. It's explored a little bit, but not as much as I'd like. The movie does deliver a lot of stuff that it went a little beyond my expectation, and I'm impressed that it's definitely another Asher film I'll watch a bunch of times. It's like so far all his films I plan on, like, I constantly want to watch 237 or The Nightmare, and this one's definitely going on that list too. Let me think what else came to mind. I should have written down notes. But there's also this idea of the player. So, like, let's say, like, you don't control you, which I think is kind of like, if I don't control me, how do I effectively, like, do the complex set of maneuvers that involves, relieving myself in the bathroom and then walking out, decently. Like, to me, that's the complex set of maneuvers I have to consciously pull off, to, like, not get us, not bring down the mood, not be a wet blanket, right? So there's this idea that they float in it where it's like the player might be like dropping you hints, and I'm like, I don't know if the like a big cursor, like, go here, and it's like, I don't know if that's like the player as much as it's like just the system going like, yeah, you should take a look at that right there, and then you go in and you learn something new, right? But I don't know. I think we're basically in control, and that what we're experiencing is really just. I mean, there's flat earthers, like simulation people, when you really start talking to them, like, they're like, flat earth isn't even flat enough. That was something that came into my mind, like, once flat earth was really going on. I was like, that's so stupid. And then I was like thinking about like my own interest in simulation theory, and I was like, oh, that flattens it even more, doesn't it? It's like literally code on a screen. Ooh, boy. Anyway. So this part's a little bit rough to explain. And I think it's that, like, and this is something Tom would say. He would say the avatar isn't real. The avatar is real enough, but the avatar is not real. Real enough insofar that it has consequences and it learns things and it changes behavior and so on. It has input and so on. So it's real enough in that it's like a vector for apparent information gathering. It's really like, you could think of your body as a tool that has a bunch of different like scopes and microphones on it, right, in all different directions, and that they can be tweaked in all kinds of ways depending on what you want to pay attention to. But that's really just a filter, and then that like what we call like human mind is a filter for the computer consciousness that we are. That's the player. The player is the computer AI that we are, and then what we experience as an avatar through our avatar bodies is basically like a set of the phenomena are really more like symbols. Ooh, I should eat something soon. Yeah, the phenomena around us is more just like props on a stage. They're not nearly important as like what happens through interaction. I don't know if I said that exactly the way I wanted to. I'm gonna have to take a sip of this coffee and think about what I mean by this. Okay, here you go. Think of like a ghost dressed up on Halloween, like a kid, like with like a drape, just a white drape pressed, hanging out off his whole head. Imagine that, and that only on the inside of this curtain, this little white ghost curtain, is a bunch of little like think of it like, I don't know, like Lisa Frank stickers polka dotted everywhere on the inside. Or like instead of that, think of them as just little screens, right? Like little tiny screens everywhere inside of the curtain of this ghost. That's what you really are as an avatar. You think of yourself as this body inside, but that you've got this like sheet over you that you use to sense the quote unquote outside world. Really, it's just a sheet over you. That's like what your avatar is. The sheet with like the information coming inside is like basically more like what an avatar is. So they go into this idea of like the player being like this external thing, and it's sort of like, no, it's just you in another dimension. That's it's like the easiest way to put this. No, you're just in another dimension, and the only way you can interact in this zone is through body. Or that's the primary form of activity in dealing with the zone, is through body. You basically use body to gather the information in this particular game, and you basically have to have a body to do a lot of stuff. So that's kind of a funky way of thinking about it. So yeah, they go into like all kinds of weird shit. They go into out-of-body experiences and strange coincidences, alters of perception, and by and large, I really enjoyed it. It was better than I thought it was. It was still, it's like his other movies. There's still like a little tinge sometimes where you're like, but more often than not, everything is like, well, that was super dope. I mean, you end up saying that a lot watching his other films. If you haven't seen The Nightmare, Room 237, you're missing out on some fun rides, and it's a good mark of a documentary filmmaker, especially is when you kind of want to watch them again and again. And this, I think, will have that. Yeah, I do think it was longer. I do wish it was longer. Let me think if there's anything else I would like to put out there on this. Yeah, well, I guess I could talk about my stuff in relation to this a little bit. Not much, but just the idea that in terms of like scientific philosophical models, if you take John Archibald Wheeler's idea of the participatory anthropic principle, that the cosmos requires conscious observers to, and he ended up calling conscious participants, those are necessary for the universe to undergo the formality of fucking existing. And, observer effect collapses the whole damn universe sort of idea. Conscious observer, that is. Or observer participant. That's the thing. You really got to think of it as, let's talk about observer participant. All right, that's important. That's an important idea in science, especially going into this simulation thing. John Archibald Wheeler was a really important dude. he came up with like black holes, wormholes, virtual foam or quantum foam is very important. It's this idea that virtual particles just pop in and out of existence all the time, everywhere. And I mean, that makes sense, in the terms of like a simulation. Yeah, you would have things popping in and out of existence because there would be like, you know, um, probability algorithms. It's like, okay, so if he looks here, if she looks there, this probability happens, that probability happens out of the quantum foam. It's like, yep, that makes like total sense. I mean, that's the only way that normal physical reality makes sense, because normal physical reality is like Brian Whitworth, a PhD down in Australia, said it best when he was like, virtual reality wouldn't be on the table only if the physical universe acted like a physical universe. And he's got a great quote on that if you want to go into it. So Wheeler came up with this idea of participatory anthropic participatory anthropic principle. And it was that you need observer participants that are part of this information field to collapse, which means bring into reality or render, or bring into manifestation, like render the physical universe into being. And that was like a very controversial idea and felt very wonky because they're like, does that mean you have an observer at the Big Bang? Now, I like Campbell. And Campbell's theory is is called MBT theory. He calls it my big toe theory. I love Campbell, and I love that, like, his work. But MBT, even though it is a big toe, a big theory of everything, rather than a theory of everything that just describes physics, I really read his work as something I call participatory simulism. I was calling it participatory anthropic simulism, but I'll just call it like participatory simulism, honestly. And that's just a riff on both Campbell and Wheeler, where it's like, okay, so if it's a big video game, what is it really? Oh, it's participatory simulism. We're participating in a simulation. That's it. That's what we can say for, conscious beings. If 1, they're conscious, 2, they're in a simulation, 3, what is it? Oh, it's a participatory simulation. That's it. And you could call it participatory anthropic, just because it would be part of the line of like anthropic principles that came out in the 20th century. Anthropic principles are not really principles, they're theories about why life exists in the universe. Why did life show up? How did life show up? What is it about, like, the laws of physics and nature that allowed life to show up, let alone conscious life to show up? So those are like the anthropic ideas. There's weak, there's strong, there's the final anthropic principle as well. I think like Bostrom counted them at like 30, if I remember that correctly. So there's a lot of this idea floating around in science and philosophy. But to me, what Campbell and Wheeler are really like pointing at is that, like, if it's participatory and it's an information system, it's participatory simulism. Like, at the end of the day, like, that's all it is. That's not really the simulation argument per se. The simulation argument is the likelihood of being a simulated bot in an ancestor simulation, and you are unlikely to be truly conscious. You're more likely to be just an NPC yourself, and that's, to me, like, that's meh. It doesn't really resonate with me. Anyway, let's see what else here. There's another last part. We'll just do this one part. There's one part where they talk about breaking out of the simulation, which I always thought was kind of like a impossible sort of idea, because if you're conscious, you probably need a simulation to, like, just like as a tool to filter in data. It's just sort of the idea that you can't have a perspectiveless perspective. It's impossible. It would either be all black or all white or something. But you can't have a perspective. The second you have a perspective, you have a filter, and filters are necessary for like information gathering and processing. Those are like absolutely necessary. So when I hear these, there's sometimes these guys say like, we're going to break out of the simulation. I always think that that's like one, quite a Pepsi challenge right there, bud. Like, hey, if you can figure out a way, figure out a way. Two, I always say it's like Mario trying to break out of the Mushroom Kingdom. I mean, how does that happen? What does he do in the Mushroom Kingdom that's going to help him break out of the Mushroom Kingdom? Except for make him show, like let's say he jumps off the level and he falls into the Nintendo code. It's like, it's not really breaking out, is it? Yeah, so I always was like in Campbell's Turfers, like you don't really get out as much as you explore it. Both with your body and with your consciousness through things like out-of-body experience and dreams. Let's see here. So yeah, you can't break out. I doubt you could break out. People argue like psychedelics like DMT are ways of breaking out, and I'd say like they're probably ways of like seeing more and maybe interacting with more. But I don't know if it's like a real like, I don't think you escape Alcatraz. I don't think you escape Alcatraz, man. I think Alcatraz escapes you. You can't break out. Anyway, do I have anything else off the top of my head here? See, there's breaking out. Oh yeah, signaling. Last but not least, signaling. The idea of signaling the system. Which I mentioned earlier, where it's like, well, we'll take over the universe and flash a big light at, I don't know what, one direction, ding. No, I don't. I think maybe you definitely can signal, like, I wouldn't call them the overlords. I would call it the system. Like, signaling the system, I think, is basically what your mind does all the time. Your conscious mind does it all the time. I think when you like go to the bathroom, you're sending a signal. It's like, all right, I'm going to go check out the bathroom here. And I think also like intuitive hunches might be, or open-mindedness and kind of like the kind of states you get into like, say, meditation or flow when you're like very, very open and you kind of like, sometimes you're like, something about a red balloon. And like a kid walks by with a red balloon. So I think, you can just signal for more information all the time. And depending on your state of like, your state of mind, or like let's say your processing style, your information processing style at that point. Yeah, I think you can signal all kinds of stuff. I think it might be fun to do something. I mentioned it in an essay I wrote called "Breaking into the Simulation," simulated universe, where it's like we could just build a giant monolith or like a giant statue of Morpheus in the middle of nowhere. And my guess is like weird stuff would happen around it, like I don't know, maybe like crop circles or like weird orb sightings or something like that, like something like kind of periphery might happen. But I always said I don't think like a giant laser beam is going to come down at the foot of it and, write out, well, hi there, or something like that in like, I don't know, Braille or fucking, DOS or binary or Morse code. Like, I don't see that happening. Not like in one of our, just, it'd be like a weird crop circle that you can't decipher. But no, I don't really think you even need to do that. I think you need to just like, I think the more people that would just like kind of like tune into like the idea of, like let's say we are part of a giant super AI. If everyone just turns their attention to the giant super AI, I'm pretty sure the super AI might like blink or something like that. But I don't think you need to like, spill your seed across the video game and have them all, flash lights simultaneously. So some of the ideas are still kind of trapped in physics, like normal material physics that, we assume are real. But it just gave me a thought about the last part. Okay, the last part I'll say is this that I really liked a lot. There's a sequence near the beginning. This isn't a spoiler, but there's a sequence near the beginning where it shows this guy as a kid in the car with his dad, and they're driving to St. Louis. And what he depicts in terms of like it feeling like a simulation is that like every window of the car is being like projected on by like there's like a curved screen that goes all around the car, and the car is getting a projection on it, and the car is rolling on like a stationary like conveyor belt, like a treadmill, and it's not really moving anywhere. It's just the scenery projection moving, and the folks in the quote unquote folks in the back are setting up the scenes for certain parts of St. Louis that they're in a rush to hit because they have to drive 50 miles back, so they have to time it right. And I was like, that's a great depiction of the simulation theory once you start really getting into it. It's like that's a perfect kind of depiction. Like the idea that it's just a screen all around you that moves, quote unquote, moves with you, but you're really just on this conveyor belt. Like, and this kind of connects to like a Buddhist idea, especially a Zen Buddhist idea, like Zazen, and that's like you're always in the same spot. It's a good way to think of like what's being pitched right here with simulation is that, and actually this is a great place to close because it kind of brings us all full circle. It's like, well, these are all kind of queer ideas, but like, what's another way of like thinking about this? And it's like, okay, think about it, and like you're always in the same spot. You're always, which is, you're always embedded in your you. You're always embedded in your consciousness. You can like bleed out and touch other consciousnesses for sure, but you can't like make decisions for them, and you can't like, soak up what they're soaking up individually all the time. You are always in the same spot. That's the best way. I'm just actually touched by that phrase right now. You are always in the same spot. That's the best way to think about like simulation theory, and things like a lot of like Eastern religion and mysticism that has a major focus on dissecting and understanding consciousness and sensory experience. I mean, those are like deep traditions that are older than European versions of them. Yeah, you are always in the same spot. Your consciousness is always in the same spot. It's just all the information around you changes based on partially on what you tell your avatar body what to do. Get up. The alarm went off. Get up. Go to the kitchen. Make yourself something to eat. You probably want some coffee right now. You like that coffee data. Get that coffee data stream. Go sit over here. All right, have a seat. Relax, take a deep breath, all right, begin to activate systems activation, prepare for sensory overload in the form of your fucking workday. But imagine it's real enough, right? It's real enough. Like all of that is real enough. It's real enough. But you're always in the same spot, and your spot kind of evolves. That's the idea. And you know that when you meet like a mature, hip person, is that like, oh, this person's really matured their spot. Great way of thinking about it. And I don't mean mature like august. I mean mature like deep, thoughtful, present. Yeah, cool. Well, boy, I wonder if I want to go into that just a little bit more before we go. That's something I would recommend everyone try. There's also a cute little thought exercise in the whatchamacallit, in A Glitch in the Matrix, where one of the guys is doing this reality testing experiment, a bunch of reality testing experiments, which is a big thing in mysticism, and particularly in things like chaos magic, is reality testing. That's even if you get into lucid dreaming, things like that, you basically pick up these reality testing habits, and you try to flip around the way your mind works so you can see if you can experience the world in a way that's less repetitive and getting lost in the pattern. And kind of like once you've lost in the pattern, you run on autopilot, and you miss your opportunities and symbols and information. Leads. You miss leads. You miss leads. Haha, that's cute. You miss leads while on autopilot. Oh, there's an anti-teaching for you. Yo, anti-teaching's for young people. Uh, Autopilot misleads. It takes you to what you like have to do, but it doesn't. It's like autopilot. Like you're basically not paying attention. You're just running on autopilot. Um, what was I saying just before that? Oh yeah, reality testing. So there's this guy who who's broken his week from 7-day weeks to 12-day weeks, and he has a spreadsheet that he makes. And on the spreadsheet, he color codes on certain days where like strange things happened, like little things, and then sometimes big things. Like he'll notice like every 19 days something happens at his job, or every 9 days something happens with his family. And so that's a really cool experiment that I might go into. Is change the number of days in the week. You probably have to do more than 7 because you got this 7-day job thing. So you would probably have to do at least 7 days a week would be my guess. But yeah, and just doing something like that kind of like reality testing, reality bending experiment, gets you out of autopilot. That's it. It snaps you out of autopilot because now you're engaging the game in a non-automatic way and in a creative way. And at that point, yeah, you should probably start. You might have the urge to start journaling, or keeping a dream journal, or maybe both. Just as you notice like weird kind of things pop up in the game, I think that one of the reasons why what we conventionally call magic or goals. I think one of the reasons why that like a lot of not all your goals, but the reason why a lot of goals happen, and they they usually happen in kind of like odd ways. Like you kind of just bump into the right person at the right time. I think the idea is that the reason why, let's just say, magic works is because the system wants to keep you engaged. Like the system wants to keep you playing, and because the more you play, the more you both learn. That's what I think is kind of up. So, why goals and magic and things you strive for, why they show up, and sometimes they show up in weird ways, or they show up too late, or they show up like in ways you didn't expect, or they show up in perfect ways, is literally the system, the game, keeping its players engaged. And to get that to work, you kind of have to snap out of autopilot, even though, like, even in autopilot, queer shit will get dropped into your stream, and you'll be like, oh, what the fuck? Like, things you can't help but not ignore. Like, those will bump into the stream. And, oh gosh. Yeah, ooh, boy. I'm just kind of like taken aback because there was some weird glitches while I was watching a glitch in the Matrix. This is true. This is true. One of them was somebody special told me about a dream where I was driving a car and I was driving the car into oncoming traffic and then going back into regular, the right direction. And I said like, I don't even drive a car, but we all know what that means. Anyway, I didn't crash. I stayed on the right side, I think. Well, maybe I did crash. I don't know. But if I crash, guys, let me know. Anyway, in the movie, so I hear about this stream that morning, but in the movie I watched last night, that happens. Like, that happens in the movie. And I was like, no, there's a glitch in the Matrix. Ah! So that was really cool. That was actually really, like, unbelievably weird. I was like, oh man, I should get back in the Matrix shit. Or going down the Matrix is driving against traffic. Who knows? Alright, so I guess I've said basically everything I want to say on this. I recommend it. It's really good. It beat my expectations, and you'll probably dig it as like checking out if you're not into the simulation theory, it's an interesting subculture that I think it's just grown. It's just getting bigger and bigger. And it's like everywhere. It's in academia. It's on the street. It's in courtrooms. So Yeah, I dug it. I recommended it. I mean, I'd recommend it. Um, um, I want to go more into like participatory simulism. I don't know where to do it, especially now that the IEET is down. I'm thinking maybe, I don't know where. When I decide to publish something somewhere, I'll let all you know. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, thanks for listening. You know what to do. There's a Patreon page. If you really love me, you'll check that out. And I also got like a PayPal right there if you want to do just a one-time donate. You know, I'm like every blogging internet busker on there. we're all just running on the fumes of everyone else. But hey, if you like it, let me know. Yeah, you know what to do. Anyway, let me turn this thing off. And if you do any reality testing, let me know. I would love to hear about those experiences. And if you see the film, feel free to comment and let me know what you think about it, or where you wish it would go, or what you think it should have done more or less of. Yeah. Anyway, have a remarkable and beautiful day, everybody. But once again, thank you for listening to the Eliott Edge podcast. You can find all my material and sometimes my brother and sometimes other people under Odd Edges. That's ODD Edges. And closing this out today is a brand new track from the Smelters. You can find them on Bandcamp. You'll see also a link in the description. They just released a COVID-themed punk album, and we're going to hear NYC by the Smelters on our way out. Thanks again for listening. I'm Eliott Edge. This is the Eliott Edge podcast, and tune in for more oddness, and lots of love to you all. Enjoy the ride. Bye, y'all.